Today, we will talk about breaker blocks, breakers, support resistance flips, and the high quality breaks. You'll learn the secrets of money making by trading price action. In the first part, I'll talk about high quality breaks and how to identify them with the 7 steps rule. This will be an easy and effective way of trading. Secondly, we will cover where to find these patterns and how to approach them. Finally, I'll show you 3 different trading setups that I use every day. These trading setups are everywhere and they can be used with any asset or any time frame. If you're ready, let's start. Our free trading course with price action continues non-stop. Today, we will cover the breakers and support resistance flips. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, you can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. And please try to watch the videos in order, otherwise you can get confused. Let's start this video by remembering breaker blocks and understanding the importance of support resistance flips. You'll be amazed how easy to trade breakers with support resistance flips when there is a high quality break. First of all, breaker blocks were the failed order blocks, as you remember. Order blocks fail many times with the big news or market maker involvements. These catalysts create sharp breaks and order blocks cannot hold them. So our failed demand area suddenly becomes the supply area. You know this as support resistance flips. Today we will focus on the quality of these breaks and how to identify the best breakers and learn the best trading setups by step-by-step instructions. It's not a rocket science, it only requires practice. First of all, every break may work. We do not know which breaks will work or not. However, using the high-quality breaks increase our chances, and identifying the high-quality breaks is easy. Step 1. Large body candlesticks. You should focus on really large and powerful candlestick movements. Step 2. Candlesticks should be mostly the same color. It will not happen all the time, but it is better for a strong action. Step 3. A strong breakout is ideal, just the opposite of swing failure pattern. Step 4. It should have closing candlesticks below the previous swing point. Step 5. The most important thing is imbalances. We need imbalance to identify our entry point. Step 6. Possible support resistance area. Strong SR flips make the area much more powerful. Step 7. Finally, the movement should be quick without any pause or delay. It is much better this way. These are my 7 rules for a high quality break. However, life is not perfect, also trading. Finding 7 out of 7 confirmation is almost impossible. All we need to focus on is finding the best possible and the highest quality breaks. Let's check this chart. As you can see, there are many breaks here. Which break do you think has the highest quality? Can you pause the video and identify it? Yes, this is the break that I really like. It is like 7 out of 7 confirmation. It is really strong and powerful. It has a large imbalance. All the candlesticks have the same color. It is an obvious support resistance flip area. A perfect breaker. Where should we look for these high quality breaks? There are 3 places it can happen. Market structure breaks, MSB. It is probably my favorite area to look for because it is a strong enough break that can change the trend. As you can see in this example, a very high quality break happens and changes the trend. Nice and simple. Secondly, break of structures, BOSS. Another great place to look for high quality breaks. Some people ask me the difference between MSP and BOSS. Well, technically both are the same thing. People focus on them too much. Just call them breaks. Anything you want. They only create new breaks in the market from the previous swing high or low. That's it. Do not confuse yourself too much. As you can see in this chart, a great quality break happens. Finally, the SR Philip areas in the mixed and confusing charts. Well, every chart has MSP or BOSS, but if you cannot identify them, if you are having a hard time, just look for support resistance Philip areas. These are very obvious zones. If you look at the chart, you can easily see the demand zone was holding the price very strongly until it is broken downwards. Then it became a supply area after the high quality break. Is this an MSP or BOSS? I do not care at all, just call it break. Focus on the quality of the break. All the concepts that I teach you are interconnected, all have the same purpose, that's all. Is everything this simple? Well, yes and no. However, with a couple of additional price action structures, you can easily find the best trades possible. Let's talk about trade setups. Special patterns keep happening in the markets. All setups are similar to each other with a couple of differences. First of all, identifying a swing failure pattern before the high quality break is extremely important because this is a big sign of trend weakness and stop loss hunting. Let's see an example of it. What do you see when you look at this chart? Bunch of candlesticks and confusing price movements. Well, years ago I was like you. Do not worry. With time you'll be like me. It is like taking the red pill and seeing the matrix. You can see the swing failure pattern right here. Price fails to make a break above. This indicates to me that price came here to hunt stop losses and has not much intention to go above. Then when you look at the breaks, they are everywhere. Can you tell me which break has the highest quality? Pause the video. Yes, this is our break. After the swing failure pattern, price dropped sharply. I do not care if it is a MSP or BOSS, I call it a break. This break leaves a giant imbalance behind, the way I like it. If you look closely, you can see how the SR flip happens. Once a strong demand area, now becoming a supply zone. And finally, our target. As I said, without a clear target, there is no trade. You can see the equal lows below with a half-fit imbalance. Let's check out the second trade setup that we can use. It is almost identical to our first trading setup, a swing failure before our high quality break. However, this time we can look at another swing failure pattern right before our entry. Let's see an example. What do you see here? Another confusing bunch of candlesticks, right? Let's break it down. What I see here is a considerable swing failure pattern. Price came here, barely closing above, then suddenly drops. These sudden drops make me believe this is a form of a stop loss hunt and another form of a swing failure pattern. Whatever you call it, this is a price weakness. Next is a break. There is a one little manipulation candlestick, a spinning bar here, only designed to hunt stop losses below and above. Not much to do with the real price action. However, right after that, you can witness the real high quality break. Price leaving an imbalance area. As you know, I love imbalances. Without imbalances, probably my trading skills would never have evolved. Now this is the critical point. Secondary swing failure pattern. After the break, this is another great indication of an entry for us. At the same time, you can easily notice the support resistance flip here, a very obvious price zone. Finally, before I enter a trade, I look for targets first. The only question on my mind is where the price could move to. Any reason for that? Let's check our final trading setup. It is exactly the same setup. This time, what we will wait for is the equal highs or lows or trend line liquidity. Simply looking for any kind of huntable stop-loss areas. Let's see an example. By the way, these are not just random charts of cherry picking. I took all these trades. This was my latest trade. In the next video, I'll explain in detail how I scalped this trade. Now let's go back to the basics. Step 1. Confirm a swing failure pattern, or at least a considerable swing failure pattern, as a weakness. Step 2. Find yourself a high quality break. Step 3. Identify the imbalance areas. Step 4. Check if there is a support resistance area. Step 5. Wait for stop loss huntable area, equal lines or trend lines. Step 6. Confirm a target. Always find yourself a clear target. Swing high lows, equal high lows, imbalances, fresh supply or demand areas, anything that may pull the price. Step 7. Become the hunter. Snipe scalp in low time frames. Low time frames will give you the best entry possible. Not bad, really not bad. One of my greatest trades. Okay folks, this is it. I covered extremely important subjects today. Breakers and support resistance Phillips with 3 special price action trading setups. Every price action trader in my life uses these trading patterns with great results. If you can practice, you will master them in no time. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, take care, and see you soon.